Good morning and welcome to today's presentation. Joel is my name. Yesterday around social medias there was a lot of words that were regarding on the closure of the schools in Uganda by 25th of November, and all is surrounding one word: Ebola. You know, Ebola as a disease, because Ebola is a lethal disease. But when you look at it, in 1976, the virus of Ebola was identified at River Ebola, and by then it was called Zaire, which is the Democratic Republic of Congo today. And from that time to date, there have been very different incidences that have been taking place in different African states, because in 2014, 2016, there was a very big outbreak of Ebola in West Africa, and you realize that there were a number of people who died because of the disease. And I think that could have been the biggest problem we had around that time, which was in West Africa. So when you look at Ebola as a disease, you realize that Ebola disease is caused by a virus. If I could define a virus, I would say it is a submicroscopic, something that cannot be seen by the use of this normal microscope. It is sub-microscopic, and itself cannot stand by its own. It can live and survive into the cell of another living thing. The cell of a human being, the cell of an animal, the cell of a plant, the cell of birds. So that virus will live into another cell of a living thing, multiply there. Now when it multiplies there, then it becomes in multiple. So that's a virus. If you get it and put it alone, when it's not in the cell of another living thing, it will die. So you find, so when you look at it in that form, you realize that even Ebola, since it is a virus, it has somewhere it lives. Because researchers have shown that in West Africa, this virus was in bats. It was also in gorillas. It was in chimpanzee. And there's somewhere I read, and they were showing that they found the virus in a dead antelope. So it means this virus, the virus of Ebola, can live into those animals, but they do not cause a problem into them. They will not kill the monkeys. They will not kill the gorillas. They will live there. However, when they move from them and they come into the human beings, then they start being dangerous. They are lethal. It is a very quick disease that interrupts with the clotting factors of our blood, and then when the clotting factors are interrupted with, there's what we call hemorrhage or bleeding. Because this blood cannot clot, then it means it can quickly escape from the vessels. Inside us, it will go into the cavities, and sometimes outside that, someone can even sweat blood, because this blood is not clotting. The clotting factor is disrupted. Someone can have epistaxis, someone can vomit blood. Someone else can have even blood coming from the eyes, from all the orifices of the body. Someone can have blood coming. So that blood which is not clotting causes now a problem. So that's why they call it hemorrhagic disease. Now, when you look at Ebola, Ebola is a disease. In its history, you realize that we have talked of the West Africa in by 2016. Then you realize the current problem was first realized in the DRC. And then after DRC, then we got a first case in Mubende in, I think it was 20th September 2022. Now, as Ebola, usually each outbreak starts with a single case of a zoonotic transmission. Then it gets onto human. Then it becomes human to human. So the transmission moves from one person to the other. When we are talking of transmission, that is how the disease is moving from one person onto the other, we are going to find one thing, that there should be a contact, direct contact of the body fluid of an infected person to another person who is not infected, or indirectly it could be something that is contaminated that a person who is not having the disease gets in contact with. So when I'm talking of the body fluids, I'm looking specifically at things like blood. When I talk of blood, it could be real blood, it could be its plasma or its cells, but blood. Then I'm talking about saliva, urine, fecal matter. If I talk of vomitus, we can talk of the semens, we can talk of the vaginal fluids. So those are the body fluids. It's where this organism is going to pass from the person who is having the disease to the person who is not having the disease. Now we're talking of the person who is going to be infected with the disease. That's how it's going to get it. When you get the disease, when you get that infection, there are things you will present with. You can present with, usually there is a fever, and there would be hemorrhages from any of your orifices, including the skin. Someone will have the fever, which will not even quickly respond to the treatment like the antipyretics. If you give them, the fever does not come down. It keeps up. The temperatures are always up. Then someone will be having bleeding from any part of the body. He could be having other things like the headaches would be there, general body weakness would be there, dehydration would be there, things like that. When you look at how real an Ebola case presents, you will realize that you will always have a fever. There will be an involvement of gastrointestinal system. There is always multiple dysfunction of different organs of the body. We have talked about how Ebola is going to be transmitted into people. But again, we need also to see how someone can prevent Ebola. If we are going to get the virus from contact of the body fluids, then when we are preventing Ebola, we are going to again to try and avoid both direct contact and indirect contacts of the body fluids of the infected people. We have to have protection when we are treating our people having Ebola, so that we don't get in contact with the body fluids, that is the blood, the saliva, the sweat, the semen, the vaginal fluids mentioned. Now, when we prevent ourselves from direct contact with those, then we cannot get Ebola into ourselves, becoming new cases. Now, it is true there are vaccines that were made. As we said, the disease, the Ebola virus was identified in 1976. So between then and now, there are many scholars who have taken deeper interest in learning about the disease and looking at how it can be prevented. So that is one area that we are looking at, that there are vaccines which can be used. So it is 2 vaccines that can be used to immunize against Ebola. And also, we also look at the best way of preventing it is by preventing ourselves from getting the new cases by the use of hand washing and proper personal hygiene. When we look at how Ebola is treated, Ebola is really a killer because it is now estimated that 50% of the people who get Ebola, they die. Previously, it was being looked at 25% to 90% of those people could not survive. So it is because of the rate of the interventions that there is now, we are almost coming to a level of talking of the 50%. Now, when we talk of the 50%, it means still it is a big killer. So the best way to handle is to prevent getting the new infections. And also, to prevent Ebola, we also have to try and make sure that, like for a man, if you have been diagnosed with Ebola, treated with Ebola, and then you have recovered, you don't need to have sexual intercourse, not until the semen that you are having is tested and confirmed that it's not having a virus. It can even take 6 months or even more or less, depending on the tests that are done. When you look at the current situation, you realize that we have just come from the pandemic of COVID-19, and now we are in an epidemic of Ebola. However, we also have to appreciate that these two are not the same. With Ebola, usually it is after, when it has hit someone and there are symptoms, then it can be spread into the other person, and it's not a droplet infection. If we keep ourselves from contacting the fluids of the people who have Ebola virus, then we cannot get the disease. And when you look at the COVID, for it, just droplet infections, like if you do not mask, if you do not take the precautions, you can quickly pass it. But whereas this one, it is physical contact of the fluid from one person and to the other. It's true, Ebola kills, and it kills. So there are things that we also have to avoid, like culturally, in some of our cultures, we handle the bodies of the people who have died in a different way. So that form of handling of the dead bodies also has to be checked. A person who dies because of the Ebola virus is not handled like another person who is died or who has died of malaria. So we also need to check that, because with that, it can also be a point of spreading, because we said in human, it is contact, one human having the virus onto another person who is not having the virus. So that's one of the things we should put in consideration. So as Ebola is our concern, you and me, we can fight against it, against Ebola disease, and we can have the problem stopped. Let us follow the procedures. Let us wash hands. Let us avoid direct contact and indirect contact of the body fluids of the people we suspect to be having Ebola. And let us report all these cases to the health personnel, because the health personnel can find a quick way of doing an intervention. I salute the health workers in this, because most of the health workers, they even lose their lives in fighting against it, in trying to save the lives of other people. So health workers who are involved in this fight directly, I salute them all, and I pray that they all manage to get through it when they are safe. Ladies and gentlemen, let's not politicize the lethal virus Ebola. Let's follow the instructions and we shall all get through it. Thank you very much, and thank you for tuning in. Joel is my name. Be blessed.